Welcome back here with Goldberg. Today we're going to be talking about Peter. I predicted that, Schiff. And of course, back in the day I was a big Ron Paul fan. I still like him, to be honest. Naturally, if you support Ron Paul, your economist of choice will be Peter Schiff. And he's a big contrarian. He thinks the United States is unsustainable. It's spending too much money that it doesn't have, printing to make up for what it can't collect in taxes. Saving rates are extremely low, as are artificially small interest rates, and therefore you should not be investing in U.S. stocks so much, but rather emerging markets, international ventures, and of course gold. He loves that yellow rock, and he's not a big fan of Bitcoin, which is interesting. So we're going to go through some of his predictions and whether or not you should be following him. Now, as with anyone, he's going to have nuggets of wisdom. I do like listening to him at times, as well as George Gammon is another one. But it's one of those things, often analysts are wrong, right? And the worst are the ones with the PhDs in economics, because they're all good with the advanced mathematics, the rule of 72, but they can't get their hands on proper trading techniques. So that's just something. I thought we would start by looking at some of his company, Euro Pacific Capital's fund offerings to see how they've been doing as of recently. This one is the International Bond Fund. Since the inception in 2010 till now, pretty lackluster returns. Now you might say, yeah, but it's bonds. That's not fair. So let's go here. Emerging markets, small companies from December 2010 up till today. It's had an okay gain, so I guess you could point to that. Now beware, pretty high expense ratio, 1.75%. That's typically what I do not advise. It should be sub 0.5% in most cases to be worthwhile, unless you're going to see an astronomical growth rate, which of course this one simply does not have. Now his gold fund has done probably the best overall. It's going to have about, was it 30% or so during that period. So you could point to that, but this is not tremendous. And we're going to get on the subject of gold a little bit later. But this site, he's got some interesting breakdown of what his record is like. Has he actually been correct? And it's the same thing. If you continuously are proclaiming that something's going to happen and then it occurs, whether you were actually a day before or you were 5-10 years before, you're going to claim that you are, you've got this sage wisdom, and that's questionable if you ask me. Here's some more stuff. He says in 2012 that gold's going to rise to $5,000 within a few years. It's only got one direction to go, and that's higher. As it turns out, of course, gold didn't quite play out in that direction. We will, of course, have a chart in just a second here. Other stuff he said. The dollar is going to crash. A U.S. debt will lead to a crisis of confidence. And then going back to Bitcoin, he was trying to downplay, this is one of the Winklevoss twins, he said, well, Bitcoin is actually going to be coming back as opposed to advancing. And I think it went up 20%. Now it's up to around 15. It might have pulled back slightly. He admits he's wrong, but he says it's mainly because of the advertising in favor of the Winklevoss company. So again, not everyone's correct, but I'm not sure why he has that kind of resistance to Bitcoin, even though I can understand conceptually if you're a big fan of physical gold, you would think a digital currency is an anathema, but I'm definitely more in the direction of Bitcoin than gold, to be perfectly honest. In fact, I don't own gold, I'll be honest. Say flat out, I do have some physical silver. I just recently got some more, and I'll be adding to that gradually, but I don't think that physical metals are very practical in the long run. And I'm sure I'm going to get flamed for that, but nonetheless. Now, taking a look at his gold prediction, because I remember in 2013, there was a video and he was saying, American stocks are about to collapse, get out, get into international stocks, get into gold. Which, okay, let's just take a look at that. This is summer of 2013, so we're going to go over here. June, okay, so 1373, and if we write it to the peak of 2020, like, a hot Latina would do, 1978, I think the other one I saw was 1983 was the high, so I calculated it was roughly a 43 or 44% gain. That's solid. I'm not trying to rain on the parade. But now if we look at the SPY, the S&P 500 Trust, and you go back to there we go, about 160, 164, you go up to the top here, 356. The gain is something like 115, 117%. So you see there's a major difference. Just because you think there's going to be a collapse does not mean it's an inferior way to invest. And this brings us to an important question where people are going to go, yeah, but Dr. Goldberg, why haven't the libertarians and the anarchists, the libertarians, why haven't they been proven correct, the Austrian economists? Because they've been saying this for decades, that there's going to be a dollar collapse, we have too much debt, pensions, whatever. And I think there's two primary aspects to this that have to be broken down. So the first one is going to be belief and perception, right? That surrounds the dollar and the stock market, the financial system. So I'll be one of the first people to admit I was right on Tesla as far as traditional principles, Gramian, the intelligent investor. You don't invest in a massive, bloated hot air balloon that looks like it's going to pop. If everyone's in it, if it's inflated, all right, take a step back. I was right on that. I was wrong on the fact that people believed in Tesla, that people had that kind of adamant, this is it, fear of missing out, look what it's going to do, fanboyism, whatever you want to claim it is. So I actually did make a profit on Tesla, but not as much as if I had gotten when it was at 250. So that's one of the things that's been confounding a lot of principles, especially libertarian ones, of value investing, that many of these companies, or at least their stocks, are just blowing through the roof regardless. Another one that was in that category, and it was really a coin toss for me whether I got this or something else, was the NVIDIA. Back some years, maybe it was 2010, but it was down to a pretty affordable rate. And I was like, maybe I'll buy it. I ended up getting something else. And it goes up, let's say it goes up here, okay, it's 250. Like, well, you don't buy it at a 52-week high, you got to wait for it to come down. Classic investment wisdom. Look where it is today. So oftentimes what we consider to be these hard and fast principles don't matter as long as someone perceives it otherwise. And the US dollar, if I drop a $100 bill on the sidewalk, most of you are not going to just ignore it because you're going to say, well, I can still use that. It's valid currency. So until there is a more broad-based viewpoint, the dollar is meaningless. Because we have inflation, or we have price inflation. I did a video on that. But until people actually stop having faith in the dollar, or prices get so inflated that they can see it, I don't see it going anywhere. And you may say, oh, that's just naivete, but the reality is these people have been predicting it for a long time and it hasn't happened. What is preventing it? Well, there's the other dynamic, and that is called the U.S. military. If you know these two guys, Gaddafi and Saddam Hussein. Now, there is pretty good evidence to make the argument that Saddam Hussein, the reason he was removed from power is that he was trying to switch and trade oil using euros in the market, which that's been thoroughly debunked by Foreign Policy or Foreign Affairs. Yeah, sure, we can trust them. He wanted to introduce a currency backed by gold dinars. It just so happens that both of them met an unpleasant end. The point is that the United States, we can show up, we are basically the Tomahawk missile simp. If we don't like what you're doing, if you're starting to misbehave, we can cause trouble. We still have that dominance, our Navy, our intelligence, our military bases, that in a sense props up the currency. So one of the main obstacles to the libertarians being correct is this massively socialist institution, the U.S. military. Now, whether it can last forever, whether China becomes more dominant and we start going into decline, hard to say. But I think if a libertarian got in power and actually was able to reduce our military presence without making cuts because of, realistically, our political system, the way it works, that's when I think it would play out and you would start seeing something affecting the currency in more of a significant way, and probably the stock market as well. If you announced that you were going to begin the process of ending the Fed, the stock market would probably collapse as well. So there's a lot of different factors, but as long as people believe in the system and you've got the coercive power to protect the system or force people to adopt the system, you're okay. Now, I'm not saying the libertarians are going to be wrong. They could be right. But as far as the track record is concerned, it seems like we're going to be at the status quo of the government injecting money into the economy and the market going up, expecting more. The economy itself is in tatters with COVID, but the stock market, they're like going in opposite directions. So it gives you a sense what the rich people wanted, what Wall Street wanted, is to have a system where they could never not have gains in the stock market. So you switch from the pensions that are, traditionally weren't necessarily invested in the stock market. You start investing them, then you go to the 401ks, then you get the Fed, you get all this government spending, infusion, stimulus, so that you can always see that upward trajectory, even if real people are suffering, their wages are low, their jobs aren't worth anything. So that's how I generally see it. I will be coming out with a new book on investing, an ebook. It's been handwritten, it just needs to be typed up. I'll be talking about how you can invest for the long run without having to worry about it too much. And I'll be discussing various things, precious metals, Bitcoin, which I have a certain amount of, and I'll be getting more. So, if there's other subjects you want to see me cover, just drop a comment below.